Everyone knows this image. This is Will Smith in Men in Black.
Yeah.
What he's holding is a neuralizer. Now, this neuralizer is supposed to be able to erase your memory. And what I want us to do right now is to focus on that neuralizer, and let's forget about everything you thought you knew about education.
Mr. Suleiman, where are our glasses? We said we'd wear the glasses.
Next time. So I would like to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. You could have been anywhere in the digital world, but you're here with us. I thank you, and I'm sure we've all been invited to countless webinars since the arrival of COVID-19. But this event is much different because it's not a sit and get. This event is an interactive discussion. It's a digital roundtable, and we'll be able to even involve and allow our guests to participate. This is the first of a series of webinars presented by Ittihad Private School at Mamzar, and we hope to see you at our future events. If you are a school leader or an educational specialist and interested in being a panelist in the future, please email us at Ittihad, ITTIHAD @IPSMamzar, that's MAMZAR.com. All right, let's get right into it. Firstly, I would like to thank His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, His Highness Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan, and all of the UAE for allowing us to work and serve in this beautiful country. The UAE is a country that is always seeking to innovate, to be first, and to lead the world. We are privileged to be a part of that vision and to contribute to a movement. Since March 2020, all schools in Dubai have transitioned into emergency remote learning as part of a number of precautionary measures to mitigate the spread of coronavirus. It is reported that nearly 1.5 billion students have transitioned to online learning, and with 10 million students in the GCC region. Things have changed like never before, and things are uncertain like never before. With that in mind, we planned this webinar with the purpose of serving as a platform to inform, to share ideas and best practice, to envisage what the future holds for education, and to provide a platform for networking. Today, we have some of the best minds working in education right here in Dubai. Our panelists are leaders in education working in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and also even Lebanon. We have over 100 people registered for this event. We have guests from all over the UAE, from America, from China, and other places. We are expecting some visitors from KHDA, from media outlets, school leaders from various countries, even some dignitaries. And now a few words from our Director General from our Ittihad Private School at Mamzar, Mr. Max Caruso.
Thank you, Mr. Suleiman, and welcome everybody. Mr. Suleiman, thank you for your introduction, and thank you indeed for the excellent organization of this event. Tonight is the culmination of an idea that I think, if memory serves me correct, was created over a coffee in the office after a very long school day. And indeed, we look forward to more seminars in time, as mentioned. May I, on behalf of Al Ittihad Private School Al Mamzar, welcome you all. In particular, I would like to welcome and thank our distinguished panelists. Now, I'm happy to say, as Mr. Suleiman just mentioned, that we have an audience from all over the world, the US, Europe, mainland China, Hong Kong, our GCC countries. So it's wonderful to see that so many people are interested in this topic, which of course is at the forefront of our thinking at the moment. So welcome colleagues and friends. As we, colleagues, schools and colleague organisation, I keep emphasising that word, continue to grapple with this new reality, this new normal. IPS Mamzar is an American curriculum school that is steeped in Emirati culture, character, and philosophy. As such, we had embarked upon a journey of reimagination. Indeed, no doubt, as have you all. For us, the journey of reimagination, in fact, was to think about how we can deliver education sensitive to our Emirati culture, character, and philosophy. And then the crisis emerged. As a professional learning community and as a community that is underpinned by agile Scrum methodologies, we were able to absorb that crisis to some degree. But I can tell you that we are still we are weathering the storm, but the safe harbour is still somewhat away, as you can imagine. Indeed, Mr. Suleiman, again, 1.5 billion students, 63 million educators, 190 countries, all of whom were at any one time, at a particular time, delivering distance learning and e-learning. Turning on a dime, as the old saying goes, education was upended. New pedagogies, well-being plans, assessments, and so on, everything had to be reimagined. Everything had to be redone, rethought, teachers retrained. And in so doing, the fabric and the landscape of education has been changed forever. When our schools were closed in March, we lost the present. Isn't that an interesting thought? The present became the past and the future became the now, creating a new pathway to a future that was, I believe, at that time, unimagined. Indeed, our current reality was only a few months ago an impossibility. We cannot return, nor should we return to the past. This much is self-evident. As educators, we are people of hope. And during this time of crisis, we sought and found the silver lining as we do. That is, we have all experienced a great learning opportunity. So as we now move forward with our discussion, may I leave you with a conversation that I have read a number of times and is purportedly between the great artist Cézanne and one of his critics. And the critic, looking at one of his paintings, said, "This painting, I don't see a sunset." And Cézanne, pausing for a moment, then turned to his critic and he said, "Then, my friend, you don't see sunsets the way I do." And isn't that the very essence of our discussion today? How do we now view education? What is an appropriate lens that we view education? Finally then, agideque didichistus, which means may we put into practice that which we have learned. Our children are counting on it, and they are counting on us to do that. So thank you, Mr. Suleiman, over to you, and let's rich, engaging conversation begin. So shukran, siesie, and thank you. Over to you.
Thank you for those wonderful words, Mr. Max. Okay, let's introduce our panelists. First, we have Dr. Ida Yunus. She is a leader of Twice Exceptional Education.
Hello.
In the Middle East, and she's developed a diversified portfolio of academic articles, participated in international conferences, such as the World Council for Gifted and Talented Conference. With her PhD in education, she is a transdisciplinary advocate and researcher of gifted equity. Welcome, Ms. Ida.
Hello, thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Bruce Major. Mr. Bruce is the superintendent of Collegiate American School, where he oversees the daily academic and operational aspects of the pre-K through 12th grade program. Prior to his move to Dubai, Mr. Major served as a seasoned school administrator and licensed school psychologist, having led successful schools in the United States and internationally. Lastly, leading a bilingual school and 2 international schools in mainland China. Next, welcome, Mr. Bruce. Next, we have Ms. Tammy Tusek. Ms. Tammy was appointed the head of school position at Dubai Arabian American Private School. Did I get that right, Tammy?
Correct, thanks.
And in July 2018 to transform a school, which was in rapid decline and faced being closed by authorities. Under her leadership, the school was rated acceptable, but within 7 months after multiple years of a weak rating, regained their candidacy for NIAS accreditation and were successful at being fully accredited in April 2020. The school serves predominantly an Emirati student demographic whom are being groomed to lead the UAE in the future. Welcome, Tammy.
Greetings, everybody.
We have Mr. Heath Bailey. Mr. Heath is the principal at Venice International School in Silicon Oasis. Heath has worked as a deputy principal in Al-Ain and for Athena Education at American International School in Dubai, where he served as the head of high school. Heath is also a co-host of a podcast based in Dubai called Global Brothers Podcast, which he highlights people living globally and prospering. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Heath.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me.
We have Miss Emma Debden. Miss Emma is passionate about inclusion and achieving the highest outcomes for students of determination. Alongside leading the strategic and operational development of inclusion at JES, Emma has enjoyed the opportunity to support colleagues in other settings and share her experiences at regional events and conferences. In partnership with colleagues, parents, and students during this period of distance learning, JES has evolved best practice in order to reduce barriers in the virtual classroom. Welcome, Emma.
Fine, thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Jonathan Letcher. Jonathan is a native Washingtonian who has worked in a variety of school systems through the US. He has been a teacher, school improvement officer, principal, and deputy superintendent. His current role is as head of schools at American School of Creative Science in Al Barsha, Dubai. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you very much.
Our next guest is Mr. Cody Claver. He is the general manager for iAcademy Middle East. iAcademy Middle East is a K-12 full-time online school licensed by the KSHA and the first online school accredited by NIASC. Mr. Cody is recognized as an influential educator in the Middle East and the US. He has been named one of the top 50 educators in the Middle East by Which School Advisor. Welcome, Cody.
Thank you. Thanks for having us today.
And last but not least, we have Mr. Goler Collins. Principal Goler Collins III experience is as a school leader which spans over 20 years, including the following roles: high school math teacher, middle school assistant principal and principal, high school principal, K-12 vice principal, and principal. Mr. Collins' most recent leadership positions have allowed him to facilitate improvement in attic schools and MOE private schools in Abu Dhabi and Fujairah. He is currently the principal of Elite Private School in Abu Dhabi. Welcome, Mr. Goler.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, now that we got the formalities out the way, let's get right into it. This webinar, this presentation will start with a share out, a roundtable discussion for about 24 minutes. I'm sorry, first will be a share out for 24 minutes, responding to a question, which is the topic of this evening. Next will be the roundtable, and then we'll have Q&A. So for the first question, which is the topic of this webinar, what will 21st century education look like post-COVID-19? Please, can you make your responses within about 3 minutes so that we can make sure that we have fluidity? I would like to start with, let's start with Mr. Goler. Mr. Goler, you have the floor.
Okay. Again, thank you for having me. I attended a webinar a few days ago by Dr. Bogesa Tusak-Barley. One of the things she said was, school leaders are like actors in a play. The script, the story, and the costumes are changing during mid-performance. And the overarching theme with this is, regardless of what's going on, we have to show up. And I think post-COVID-19, we will have to keep a distance learning approach to our schools, because you're going to have different parents who want different segments for their learning. For example, a recent article in The National reported that 40% of the deaths in the UAE were related to diabetes. You have a lot of students and a lot of staff members who are diabetic. So these parents may not want their students to return to school, even if the government allows for a full return inside the building. We have to make sure that we have a blended learning format to accommodate these students, especially also students that have autoimmune diseases who are more susceptible to severe cases of COVID. Also, with the script changing and changing mid-stage, we had to go from having pre-recorded videos to incorporating live sessions to then making sure assessments could be done online so we could give students feedback on their progress. So our experience with COVID-19 kind of changed as the script and as the play went on, and I see that continuing for the future. So we have to make sure that we have a blended approach to make sure every facet of the student body is covered. Also, I think we need to keep incorporated social interactions for students. If we do come back to a distance learning format, we have to make sure that our students have some kind of creative social interaction aspects to our program. And the last point that I would like to make is I think with schools making a comprehensive distance learning program, it should give more credit to online degrees here in the UAE. We have a lot of teachers that are trying to get jobs and be approved by the different agencies for online degrees, and usually that's kind of frowned upon here. So being that this happened and we've had to have a holistic, comprehensive approach to distance learning, hopefully this will spur more credence given to, faculty and staff and different professionals being approved with online degrees, since now our education is a complete distance learning format. So again, I don't think COVID-19 will pretty much end until there's a cure. So we have to make sure we have a comprehensive distance learning program that's flexible for parents, for students, and different situations that may arise in our schools.
Very insightful, very insightful. I would like to go next to Ms. Tammy.
Hi. I agree with what he said. I think one of the key words about post-COVID education is that of resiliency. As Goler mentioned, we've had to shift our models of distance learning in many different ways throughout each of the weeks. We have to continue to monitor what's happening in the global workforce and higher education so that we can best prepare our students for the needs that they are. At our school, we specifically focused on student voice and getting their feedback in regards to the programs we were offering. And what we sometimes thought was best in mind, the feedback from them was a better implementation model. So by empowering our student voices and preparing them for those leadership models, we found that we had a better product of education as an output. We see that the workforce is also considering some major changes in regards to governmental offices being off-site. The technological revolution is in full force in so many different capacities. So empowering our students to embrace that and to be resilient. Because as Goler mentioned, COVID is still alive. We see cities in China still closing down or cluster areas of neighborhoods, which means that this is going to be alive for quite a while. And our models are going to have to change based on how it resurges into our communities, etc. So for us, it's keeping a model that's flexible, incorporating social model for students to allow them to have opportunities to collaborate, to also lead, trying to get them involved into some of the corporate sectors so they're become more involved with hands-on activities, because it looks very different in the technological model that we are implementing right now. I think that the bachelor's degree, as universities continue, that's going to look much different. I speak on behalf of my students who we found have taken it, as they're on online courses, they tend to wander into different rooms and activities and things. These micro-credentials are going to be a big thing of the future, where they will be getting certificates and mastery of different types of skills that they can apply. And already my students have embraced that, and many of them are coming back with different certificates and technological skills that they may not have had. So all of a sudden they are on their own independent opportunities. They've taken on things of robotics, programming, and things of that nature of a much higher level than we see. So I think that we as schools have to respond by being very flexible, meeting their needs by what they're demanding of us, and looking at the future workforce and what the needs are for that.
Thank you, well said. I would like to go to Mr. Jonathan.
Thank you. I was hoping to go last so I could just say I agree with everybody else. It made my life a little bit easier. But there are a couple things that I think that maybe that I can add to the conversation thus far. The two things that I'm thinking about. One is, as as we know that many of our schools, particularly here in Dubai, there's a push for schools to be student-led, to have student-led learning in some form of capacity, where project-based learning or constructivism or opportunities for students to lead the classroom is starting to be first and foremost in their minds. I think post-corona, that ideal will be magnified to a great degree, simply because so much of what kids are doing or have to do is online and will have to be done by themselves, independent of a teacher or a parent. So I think this has magnified that idea of children working independently. I also think that this is also putting a spotlight on schools and what they truly believe and what they truly do. Every school has a mission, it has a vision, and it has a plan of action of how they want to teach. You have different curriculums, you have different ethoses, you have different ways of teaching, traditional, progressive, and all kinds of other things in between. But because the structure is such that parents now not only think about what's going on in the school, they can actually see it. Because as they're at home with their children, they can have a bird's eye view of what their children are learning and how their children are interacting in the class, if it's a live session. So they not only have a sense of what's going on, they can actually know what's going on. And I think a lot of parents are raising questions about the value of what's going on, but also too, giving their input as far as what the school truly believes and what they truly are focused on. So it is putting a spotlight on the quality of teaching. It's putting the spotlight on independence from my perspective. So I do think, like my colleagues have said so far, this is not going anywhere. And if anything, it's going to increase and enhance. So I think we need to get ready for it and just accept the fact that online learning is going to be part of the natural fabric of teaching going forward.
Excellent. And I think a great point that you made is parent involvement is at an all-time high now.
Yeah.
They are seeing everything that we do through live stream sessions. They are totally engaged and totally involved. And I think that is a plus. That's added value to what we do as educators. I would like to go to Mr. Heath next.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I was reading, and some of the research and notes that I had was parent involvement and stronger partnerships is extremely vital. I read something that a gentleman said about this actual issue, and he said, crisis forces us to adapt. And that led me to think about education from the 1600s, formalized education, traditional learning, moving slower. And now we're forced to move a lot faster and think, more innovative and be more creative. But I don't look at this as, and I think as leaders, we shouldn't look at this as a crisis. Any shift or change in the way we educate our children should be a transformation or an adjustment. And this will, of course, require us to be transformational. Schools, will have to position themselves differently, of course, and the staff in regards to child protection, child safety has an extra layer of responsibility. School leadership, of course, has another line item, because in order to open up a school or operate, even in social distancing, if we have 30% of our population, something like that, we're going to definitely have to pay for all of the things that we're seeing in the malls and seeing in the stores in regards to signage and making sure we have preventative measures for our kids to be safe. In regards to our teachers, the teaching and learning environment, a more personalization of learning and adapting the lessons to each student is important. Adjusting the outcomes and expectations from students. As a social justice educator, I think about educational equity and the digital divide that exists. So I can go on and on. There's a lot of things that I had that has already been stated, but there's a different social norm or practice, and it'll bring us closer. Only 5 years ago, if you think about it, being online, a teacher being online with a student was forbidden. You know, using even WhatsApp with students and parents wasn't really the norm. So we're actually getting a lot closer. So we have a lot of work to do, but I think post-COVID education is experimental. It's a period we're in. Entire school communities and stakeholders will shrink actual distance between teachers, parents, and students. And it's going to make us a lot more, we're going to come together and be a lot more accessible. So teachers are going to have a tough time adjusting to the technology, understanding the programming that's needed. And of course, student engagement is going to have to, we're going to have to find different ways to make sure students are a lot more engaged in a virtual setting.
Excellent, excellent, well said. Okay, next we'll be moving on to Mr. Bruce.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Again, thanks for giving us this opportunity to discuss with you. You know, from my perspective and kind of some of the preparations that we're undertaking at Collegiate American School, we focus on three main areas for our post-COVID implementation of our program. The first is curriculum and instruction. The second is health and safety. And the third is just how do we engage parents and the public in our school community. Some of my colleagues already spoken on some of the health and safety issues and the community issues, but I'd like to talk, just kind of drill down a little bit on the curriculum and instruction component of it. And with that, so we're can examine that from the short-term perspective as well as from the long-term perspective, and the implication that this pandemic has had on the progression of student learning. So what I mean by that is in the short term, you know, what we had to do is schools had to address that. We'll have to address that gap in mastery of those goals and objectives that we had to kind of scale back in order to fit our curriculum into this digital platform. We all know that all curriculums have standards that we're not able to teach. You can't teach them for an entire year, even in a brick and mortar setting. So most schools will focus on those essential standards. Well, during distance learning, we have to scale that back even down, through meaningful planning and vertical planning to what we call were our core essential standards. And these were the skills that the students needed as prerequisites to acquisition of new content. And so we think about this, how we scale those skills back to those core essential standards. And so when students come back to school, I think it's essential for schools to think about how do we make up for that loss for what's happened there. So that COVID-19 loss. And unfortunately, COVID-19 fell right at that time where the problem is exacerbated because you have what's traditionally known as summer loss that's happening there. So you got the COVID-19 loss, let's piggyback on the summer loss. And then so as we return to our buildings or whatever iteration of school that we have for the fall, it's essential that we continue that student-focused approach to curriculum and instruction, really looking at students through either standardized diagnostic assessments or through standards-based assessments, looking at the individual school skills that students have or gaps in learning that students have occurred, and how do you, as a school community, involving all your stakeholders from the environment to your human capital, how do you make up, how do you assist students and so they continue their progression academically in there? That's namely done through intervention groups, small group interventions, or just really monitoring and curriculum mapping in a sense that you can ensure students mastery towards those curriculum goals. And that's kind of that's really a focus that we're having at Collegiate American School, is thinking about the purpose of school and looking at our standards, looking at our curriculum objectives, and trying to figure out what's the best way that we move our students in a progressive manner as we transition into, again, most folks call it a new normal. I refuse to call it a new normal. I'll call it post-COVID, but I think the normal is always there, and that is that focus on students teaching and learning and ensuring mastery of our students. And so as we go back to schools, we go back to school in the fall, or whenever we go back in whatever iteration of school we have, it's essential that we focus on those curriculum standards, those curriculum objectives, and ensuring that students progress towards mastery for those skills.
Those are some very good points, Mr. Bruce. I would now want to shift to Mr. Cody.
Thanks.
And if you can share from your perspective with iAcademy and online learning, I'm sure things have been a roller coaster for you in these times. Please proceed.
Yeah, it's certainly been busy. There's no question about that. You know, I really appreciate all of what's been said so far. I mean, what a very knowledgeable education group you've put together here. So I'm quite impressed. And you know, the things that I see and how I see education changing. I think the very first thing that has to happen is, you know, schools have to be able to guarantee families and students that they've got quality, or they've got access all the time. You know, they've got full-time access to their curriculum, to their teaching, that those things cannot be disrupted. And so I think that's one of the things that parents are looking for is, you know, will my school be able to deliver, you know, all the time, or am I going to, you know, have this period of readjustment again? So I think it's really important that as schools move into, you know, this fall, that they can 100% for sure say that, you know, that they're going to have, you know, a high quality teaching and learning experience for kids. I appreciate too, you know, Jonathan talking about what I would maybe term student agency, and that kids really in an online or in a blended model setting are really in a position where they need to take responsibility for their learning, and which, you know, by the way, I mean, learning should always be done by the learner. So I think that's a really good thing for kids to do. And then I think too that the role of the teacher, you know, instead of the beacon of information is really understanding how to facilitate learning and doing that through, you know, through technology. That helps, but technology is not everything. And by the way, even in an online school, I would say the single most important factor for student success is the teacher. So I never, you know, we would never look at the teachers being replaceable or, you know, not that important. We think they're very, very important. But learning how to actually facilitate that learning and getting kids, you know, to be a little more inquiry based in their approach to their learning. So, you know, I think those are all important aspects of what schools are going to look like. But I think first and foremost, you better make sure that kids have access to schooling and quality teaching and learning at all times.
Definitely. Thank you, Mr. Cody. Okay, now I would like to shift to Miss Emma, and I want to give you a more targeted question. What will education look like for students of determination post-COVID-19? Because as we know, students with special needs are likely to be the most susceptible to this type of transition. So can you consider what are the academic implications and social emotional implications in your answer?
This is where I'd love to kind of pull out my crystal ball and have all of the answers for everybody. But listen, I'm going to echo the sentiment of the great majority of speakers who've gone before me. I know Tammy used the word resilience, and I think that threads through as quite an important kind of factor for our students of determination. I've kind of made myself copious notes here, and I hope not to bore people, but it's going to just help me with my process. Cody's just sort of talked about technology and that how technology can't drive things. I come from a primary perspective, British curriculum, just for context. And as a school, we're all about future readiness and skilling children with technology. But when you're talking about those very young children, which I guess for you guys is kindergarten and upwards, the most important thing we develop in a school is relationships with peers and relationships with adults. And right now in these circumstances, our children are arguably denied so many of the factors that are important to developing relationships. And when you then add in children who might be experiencing some barriers to learning, then that becomes that much more complicated. So we have to consider innovative ways where we can replicate that. And of course, I would challenge anybody to ever be able to replicate the experiences of being in a classroom with peers and with adults to learn from. So Obviously, the other things that we have to bear in mind, and I think people have alluded to it, perhaps not necessarily use the terminology of safeguarding. You know, while our students are remote from school, we have to accept their vulnerability, particularly perhaps some of those students of determination for whom they've experienced more significant challenges to accessing learning, and they become more vulnerable in that environment. So, you know, we have to make sure, I totally agree with what Jonathan was saying about, you know, students need to lead that learning when the age and stage of development is right for them, but we need to maintain those parents' relationships, which I know has already been spoken about. I think one of the biggest challenges that I've seen from talking with parents, and we've had to kind of really get on board and be innovative. So we've developed what we've referred to as a kind of distance learning agreement, which is a lot like our kind of IEP meetings or review meetings. I'm not sure the terminology that's most familiar to you, but when we're goal setting and we're getting together with parents and we're engaging with the students where it's appropriate as well. And we're really talking about personalised pathways. And for a lot of these young people who are going to be challenged with learning, you know, even so much as setting up a home learning environment that replicates as much of school as possible, because for some, those blurred lines between what is a traditional classroom environment, however innovative it might be, is very different to a home learning environment where I'm safe and I can switch off from all that nonsense. Now we're telling them, actually, no, you've got to do what you traditionally do in school, but at home, without the benefits of having your friends, without the benefits of all of the kind of other exciting stuff that comes with. And of course, then there's that balance, but actually, I would argue an advantage at this time that a school offers opportunities for academic enrichment and for, to a certain degree, life skills enrichment. But that's what we need to play on, I think, during a distance learning environment. Where are we taking those opportunities to develop life skills for these young people at whatever development stage they're at? We can really use that as part of a benefit of a home learning environment, I would argue. I think one of the things, and I think it's been touched upon, where there was a discussion about assessments and making sure that we get careful benchmarking. We have to be careful when we're even monitoring children's attendance as a data point, and where are those students falling between the gaps, and why is that happening for our students of determination? And I think then those are almost things that we've been considering during this process, but going forward, and I like the suggestion, you know, that we don't necessarily want to consider this a new normal, but I suspect we're going to be looking at some form of hybrid model, whether that's partly in school and partly at home. I'd love for us to think about, well, how can we make that work best for some students? For example, and I won't use personal experience of individual families, but for some of our students of determination, they've actually thrived in these circumstances where others have been significantly challenged. What can we borrow from what we've learned about those children that are thriving to bring back into school? And I would argue, and I think somebody already talked about sort of personalised pathways. One of the things that we've got from Student Voice is that children are actually really enjoying deciding what they're studying during what part of the day, and they're being able to pick the day that works best for them. I don't suggest that I have the answers as to how that can be brought back into school, but wouldn't it be wonderful if it could? You know, what can we learn from parents and from the students themselves about their environment that they've been working in at home? Can we bring any of that back in? That kind of blended learning, the kind of live synchronous versus asynchronous. What's worked well in terms of personalising for children? Do they have a preference? Can we play to that preference? Bring in the children who prefer the kind of live engagement and allow those who prefer to spend more time at home to do that. Of course, you know, a hybrid model comes with its challenges. We've got working parents, you know, to suggest that 30% of the time is spent at home, and the rest in school. Well, isn't that great? But not all parents are going to be able to accommodate for that. So there's lots of things to think, because for me, when you're talking about a students of determination, you're talking about a family of determination, because it is such a challenge potentially that we've got to factor all of those things in. You've got those multidisciplinary approaches where you've got therapies and external agencies, and where can we interplay those to give our children the very best opportunity? And let's be honest, I'd much rather be sitting in a physical room with you guys, engaging and interacting, because as great as this opportunity is, it's still two-dimensional. So we miss those real nuances for communication. And when you're talking about children and young people who have perhaps social communication challenges, and I'm the mother of one, and I know he has his frustrations engaging with people this way and not necessarily finding it easy to interpret and understand in that set of circumstances, that can be a real challenge. So, you know, I don't know that we're ever going to be able to find a perfect world in a virtual classroom, but I'd love to think we can find the very best bits to augment the virtual and the physical, and really put together a package that works for our students of determination.
Emma, well said. That was a lot to digest, but also so important, so true. And now, Dr. Ida, I would like to ask you the same question, but from the perspective of gifted and talented and twice exceptional students. So how will it change for our gifted and talented students? And has there been any implications on how we will support these students in the future?
Okay, now because of the virtual learning, I got an issue with my connection and now I'm back. So this is one of the problems we need to sort out. Anyway, so I will start in general about the whole education system, and then I will go to twice exceptional students and gifted students. So from a business perspective, I need to say that we had a tough lesson. We need to be, as schools, more predictive rather than reactive. Now, schools collect data from its own system, but we need now to go more into the environment externally in order to be quick in our responses. And maybe some schools took a lot of time in order to adapt to virtual learning. Some of them are still struggling. Some of them had to shut down. Okay, so this is an issue for the whole schools. Perhaps we had the pleasure maybe to have panelists from outstanding schools, but this doesn't apply to all schools, to the whole education system. And I can see that the SDG 4 for the United Nations is now really kind of behind. And so there was also a kind of shuffle in the roles that teachers, students, parents, and leadership teams have. So now teachers are more of coaches and mentors rather than the previous image that we had of educators. Now, again, as leadership, we need to realize that we must have, as part of strategies, something that could be for contingencies, something for mitigation, for emergency, because risk management is not only about gaining or losing. Okay, so we had a very tough lesson as educators in general and leaders. Now, for the gifted and talented, I believe that we disappointed them because they are in schools in order to develop their gifts and talents. And now, especially because of their curiosity and superior abilities, they were stuck in a problem worldwide, and we weren't able to, through the skills that we were developing for them, we weren't able to solve it for them. So again, the kind of anxiety that gifted and talented students and depression, they already struggle with in school, whether they are supported or not, okay? Now, this is something at a higher level. And unfortunately, the status of gifted and talented, not to talk about twice exceptionality, because again, it's really behind, for a big proportion of the countries, it's something considered as not as a priority. Okay, so especially now that priorities have changed for schools, this category of students will be, again, more of underserved, more of marginalized, and maybe we'll have further problems with identification, further problems with supports, because the budget that the school has will be allocated for other services that the school will have to cater for. So when we talk about more virtual tools, more online tools, this will be for mainstream students. Okay, when we speak about economies of scale, schools will have a look at the mainstream students in general, not in specific the gifted and talented students. And again, this is for a big majority of schools. I'm not talking about proactive schools which take the initiative and support these students. Now, I would like to talk also about twice exceptional students. Now, let's say in the UAE, these students are really left behind. And now, because of COVID-19, this will be something even more of a problem. They will be struggling even more. But now I know that parents have been mentioned by many of our panelists. Due to the COVID-19, parents got to know their children. So they got to know the deficits of their children because they were following up on their studying and also their strengths. And parents play a very important and significant role in identifying twice exceptionality. So this is, let's say, something positive. Now, I don't want to be really a pessimist, okay, but priorities have changed for schools. Unfortunately, gifted and talented are going to be somehow left behind, no policies in many of the countries. So this is going to be a big issue. But hopefully, I just want to conclude with something maybe more of positive, because I've been too negative with what I have mentioned. Let's hope that schools will realize that gifted and talented students, as well as twice exceptional students, are future problem solvers, and it's worth investing in their education, okay? Because hopefully we will not face COVID-19 or anything similar to it, but in case of such a scenario, we need to have an equipped future population to solve our problems. So this is what I had to say about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ida. Okay, so now that we've broken the ice, we can jump right into our roundtable discussion. I've heard the COVID slide. I've heard more personalized learning. I've heard more relationships with parents. I've heard online learning, blended learning. These are a lot of things to digest. And really, we probably would need 5 hours to really treat the topic appropriately. But let's move forward and let's do the best that we can so that we can share some information with our guests, with each other. So with all of these ideas, how do we bring the parents along? How do we encapsulate all of these ideas and ensuring that we preserve Emirati culture? Because we are in the UAE. How do we ensure that we preserve Emirati culture, Emirati character and philosophy? And let's start with Mr. Max, and then we'll just go on. We're going to let it go naturally. Let's see where it goes. Mr. Max? It's
a very important question, particularly for a school such as ours, where we have over 80% of our children are Emirati families. And it's a question that we've been asking ourselves, as I mentioned earlier, prior to the crisis, basically not quite overwhelming us, but close to. So some of the questions that we've been talking about in the school, and it has allowed us to, I guess, become a little bit more focused, is how can we enliven our culture? How can we enliven our character as a school. And again, I mentioned earlier about the silver lining. You know, we are people of hope, so we always look for that silver lining. And for us, it actually gave us an opportunity to think about what the day might look like, what the classroom might look like. How are we able to cope with, for example, you know, we live in an incredibly hot country. How are we able to shift the day so that we don't have families that are traveling in cars for 2 or 3 hours a day, moving to and from school? How can we shift the week? And this has now provided us with a perfect opportunity to do just that. During special celebration times or times of religious observance, for example, how can we recreate the school day or the school week so that we allow for these incredibly important activities to occur without necessarily impinging upon the learning of the students? So we have begun to some degree enact that within our school over the last few months. And it's an important discussion that we are continuing to have with the parents. And the beauty of what has occurred, you know, on the one hand, frightening, but on the other hand, also very positive, is that our parents, yes, indeed, they have come into the classroom. They've come into the classroom and they have sat alongside their children as they have engaged in a learning environment that perhaps is quite different, but still, it's allowed them to have a bird's eye view. And in doing that, I think it's allowed the parents to actually become more involved in the learning and the education of their students, of their children. And therefore, it has increased, in my view, a more positive conversation that is occurring between the school and the parents. We are co-travelers on this journey. You know, we are co-teachers, we are co-facilitators. One of the most important changes that I think that we've seen here, and again, it's at the heart of that question that you asked, Mr. Suleiman, is that not only have we had the parents walking alongside us, we've had the children working alongside us. They have been involved in actually creating, to some degree, the program that we are running. Because their voice has been heightened, their voice has become more important. And they've actually provided us with a lot of food for thought that allowed us to recreate and to change perhaps our thinking. And it's an ongoing process. So I think we can grasp the opportunities here, as I mentioned earlier, for us to be able to utilize the time that we have at this particular point in time to be able to recraft and to re-engineer a learning experience that focuses on the culture, character, and philosophy of the young people that we serve. So I look forward to that as an emerging and evolving story. I also agree with a number of the comments that were made earlier in regards to, yes, absolutely, we need that normal, whatever that looked like then and now, but we also need to be able to be agile in our thinking and in our planning to be able to foresee, indeed, as was also mentioned, what potential changes can occur.
Can I jump in real quick?
Please.
Okay. One of the things to the original question about preserving what is important to a place that we are, because we're taking into account that the audience is broader than Dubai or UAE. If I may, I'd like to suggest that I think that can work here quite well. As this is being recorded, right? This presentation is being recorded right now. And all of us can take a copy of this recording and look back and see, was my hair right? Did I sound okay? Did I speak clearly? Did I make sense in my conversation? This is the beauty of the technology that we got going on right now, because one of the things that none of us foresaw as a benefit was the fact that live sessions are recorded. And so we were using that as a tool to advance the teaching with our teachers. Instead of having the videotape, we can just say, go back, listen to your recording, and you tell and reflect on what you heard or what you didn't hear in the conversations you had with your students. Like, one of the things that I think that's very important, that again, beneficial to any groups of kids anywhere, is the fact when the children do the bulk of the talking. Like for our school, one of our rules is we have an 80-20, we have two percentages that we use. We have an 80-20 rule and we have a 75% rule. The 80-20 rule is that 80% of the talk in the classroom needs to be done by the students, 20% by the teacher. And the 75% 75% rule is that any child, when a teacher does talk, 75% of what she asks should be open-ended critical analysis questions. Now, we can take that and abide by our rules, and a teacher can listen to her recorder, his or her recording, and then find out if in fact they're doing that. They can also go back and listen to make sure they're getting around to all the children. They can go back and make sure that participation of all the students is there. And if a classroom, whether it's recorded or not, if a classroom has the majority of children participating and doing the work themselves, they then can determine, they can direct how the lesson goes. One of the things another thing we did, and this can be done in any form, in any subject, is that one of the big pieces that we're focused on is Quran memorization. And well, great. So the kids can do the recording, they can listen to themselves do it. And as the parents are walking back and forth, they hear their child participating in this event, and they see the benefit of what the schools has to offer. Also, anything that anytime, I'm assuming that most of us are parents, we enjoy, we get excited to see our child participate in some form or fashion, and speaking with clarity, being independent, and speaking with authority about any subject with anything. If the focus is on that, no matter the subject, I think you will find that a greater participation with parents and students across the board. This has really opened the door, truly, for parents getting a real view of what goes on in the classroom. And we need to capitalize on that by releasing the learning to the students.
Definitely. Dr. Ida?
Yes, I would like to add to what Mr. Jonathan has been talking about. In the past, I spoke about it earlier, the data, the use of data. In the past, we were just limited maybe to assessment, students' work that was written or presented as videos, as assignments, let's say. But now we have different forms of data collected from our meetings, let's say, because we're able to record them, from our, let's say, students' work, our class. So now you use the word reflect on it, but what I can even add to it is that we can improve based on it, and this way we can involve different users, not only the teacher and the student and the class, or let's say the head of a certain department. We can add parents to it, let's say social people from the community, and so on. So I believe that we widen through technology, we widen the participation, the potential of participation from different stakeholders. This is something positive. We need to take advantage of it. The school is not anymore just simple report card with our comments as teachers, with our feedback as teachers. No, now it's something beyond that. So technology and virtual learning somehow forced us to move this way, but we should take the positive side of it.
Very true. So Max, you look like you wanted to add something, and then I'll go to Tammy after that.
Yeah, very, very briefly. Oh my gosh, you gave me a beautiful segue. I wanted to very briefly talk about our teachers. I have never been prouder in my life to say that I am a teacher. Never been prouder in my life to say that. Not a principal, a teacher. So proud of that, and I'm so proud of our teachers, certainly in our school, but of course all of our schools. We've all seen the extraordinary work that they've done. I mean, again, we turned on a dime. We this massive change, and it was extraordinary because I think initially we were all, really quite concerned about how our staff would react to this change that was imposed upon us. But it was almost like the shackles were thrown away. All of a sudden, this creativity came into play, and these wonderful, engaging classroom experiences emerge over this time. And the talk, I mentioned our professional learning community model. We have PLTs that are in existence. And the amount of positive discussion, planning, and classroom interaction that's going on. Teachers are going into each other's classes, observing each other. It's just been extraordinary. So again, we always looking at the positives. We have this opportunity for truly action research that's occurring in the schools. So, capturing what we do, reflecting on what we do, and then building upon the positive processes, I think it's an extraordinary time. So thank you, Doctor, for that lovely segue. And again, the conversation has been extraordinary. Thank you all.
Just to transition, Miss Principal Tammy, like I was going to come to you, like I said before, but what does the ideal candidate look like now? Because we've seen such a change, and teachers, they had to upskill, they had to learn new things, learn new technology. What is the ideal candidate now as we think about recruiting as a school leader?
Well, I think piggybacking on what Max said, what I've seen of my teachers is they become risk takers. So they have chartered unto unfamiliar territories where we continue to try to develop in particular technological skills and things, but they've always been apprehensive. And distance learning has forced them into it. And within 1 week, they became really active in pedagogical and technological skills. So as a principal in recruiting now for the future, I'm really looking for a candidate that's a risk taker. Talking about what does learning look like? Are they fluid in their thinking? I think it was Emma that spoke about learning during different times of the day. Some of our students are early risers. Our WhatsApp groups start at 5 o'clock for some reason, some of the grades. And then I have groups that are also facilitating themselves, later in the day, 7, 8, 9 o'clock p.m. So the flexibility is important, but a really big thing is encouraging the students to lead. So people spoke about what was happening. For me, the students exceeded my expectations. They really led this initiative. They created their own groups on Zoom and Teams and had study groups. They facilitated their own prayers. We watched KG, grade 1, grade 2, teaching their parents how to use the different platforms that we were using. And it was very endearing to us because they are the future. So as we were watching this is what we want. And I would look for an educator that's a facilitator of these skills. The brick and mortar is gone. We know that. It might be a hybrid model that might come in place and whatnot, but our students also evolved and very quickly through this whole distance learning initiative. So the ideal candidate must be a risk taker, must be flexible and confident enough to allow their students to lead, and a listener is what I believe is important.
I'm hearing a little distortion.
Myself, Mr. Saran, the secondary principal.
Okay, so yeah, sorry for that disturbance. Someone wanted to get in because they felt how much power we had in this room. I wanted to go to Bruce with this one because we're talking about being lifelong learners, and that's what we want our students to be. So we have to also be models and examples of what lifelong learning is. But in this context, student voice and student agency and student-centered. We've heard that many times, but now it's a whole different meaning. So could you kind of expound on that and give us define that, if you may?
Absolutely. When we talk about student-centered at our school, it's really, really important component to our school success, in the sense that even to the original question about designing a program that is culturally sensitive to Emirati students. Our school population is about 15% Emirati students, but vast majority is expats from over 70 countries. So we do a lot to just talk about cultural sensitivity among our students, among our school community. But we do that in the context of how do you parlay that into curriculum and instruction? Because I'll go back to that whole thing of what are we here for? What is the purpose of school? Some people say, well, it's for babysitting or it's for whatever. No, purpose for school is prepare our students to be quality citizens, to be lifelong learners, to contribute to society, to be global citizens in this society, then you have to be global citizens. How do you incorporate that into your curriculum and instruction? And to that end, things look differently now. They look differently before COVID-19. Digital learning brought in a different perspective of it, and post-COVID-19, it will continue to look different. And what I mean by that, and a lot of folks have said the same thing, the role of the classroom teacher really shifts to what's the role of the student in his or her teaching and learning. I do a lot with professional development, talking to our teachers, talking to parents, even talking to students about ownership. How do you own your learning? And how do you design an instructional model that students are able to own their learning? Digital learning brought that out a lot because students they got to explore more of their learning styles and what their interests are. You know, as we moved to digital learning, brought in a lot more project-based learning. So students got to put in their own personalities and their own interests into the content area. Again, go back to our standards. We go back to our curriculum standards and objectives. They're clearly laid out from us. If you're using British curriculum or Common Core standards or Singapore curriculum, regardless of what you're using, there's a set of standards that's saying this is what students need to learn. Someone at some desk decided that this is what a student needed to learn in order to be successful. And what digital learning has done and what successful schools have done before, during, and after is kind of shifted that model to say, okay, fine, these are the skills that the students need to learn. How do you facilitate that transformation of learning? Learning is a transfer of knowledge. So you have to involve the recipient as part of that process. And so by truly being student focused and bringing to your second question, what type of teacher that you're looking for, you know, that teacher that we're looking for in that context is a teacher who is comfortable enough to step back. A teacher who can step back and say, it is not necessarily my role to provide direct instruction to students, but a teacher who can facilitate learning, facilitate the transfer of knowledge. Learning takes place inside the head, not teaching takes place outside of the head. Learning takes place inside. So a teacher has to facilitate that process. And like many of you, I applaud our students tremendously during this process because they stood up. They stood up and they took on the challenge. I'm talking about with 100% participation in our digital learning platform, an average daily membership of 97%, where students wanted to be a part of the process and wanted to be a part of their acquisition of new content knowledge. But at the heart of that is knowing the students. How does that facilitate it? Knowing your individual students, allowing students to put their interest in their subject matter. So as we move into the fall, it's no more about, okay, here's a project, here's what you have to learn, here's what you have to do. It's more of a conversation. What would you like to do to demonstrate to me that you understand this concept? How would you like to do that? Is it in a visual context? Is it in an auditory context? How do you want to convey that you understand this content? Because that's what we focus on. Here are the skills. Here's what we want you to learn. Here's what we say you should be learning. And now from a student's focus perspective is how do I help you get to that level?
I think you made some great points, especially with basically a defensive learning, or to show that you have the certain competencies that we're asking for. Because in this time, do we even know, or I should ask you, and I'm going to take this to Heath, what changes do we need to make to what we actually teach? And the flip side of that is, what parts of assessments do we need to carry moving forward, and do we need to throw away in the trash can to prepare our students for the future?
We definitely need to think differently about assessment. But, you know, going back to what many people said, and I'm really stuck on what Bruce was saying about the teachers and the students. I think there needs to be a community swell around, and I might not be answering your question, but because I'm really stuck on something that Bruce was talking about, and Tammy and a couple other people, Max as well. The leadership, there has to be a swell around offering kudos to some of these teachers and students, as well as the parents. I mean, we're saying a lot here on this forum, and I know, you know, maybe individually we're saying a lot to our teachers, but they need to know that they're doing an exceptional job in handling this unprecedented time. And I'm just happy to hear that, because a lot of teachers that I talk to, I'm in many teacher groups and things like that, they don't feel that. They don't feel that they're appreciated. So I'm really happy to hear this, and I'm really happy to see that there's, you know, upwards around 60 people in this chat, in this Zoom room, because they need to hear that they're doing, they're in uncharted waters, their livelihood is threatened, the resources, you know, many of them are on different pay scales and schedules and things like that. Schools are closing. I'm fortunate enough to start a new school in this, and it's been very challenging. So I'm just happy to be a part of this group, because it's inspiring me. But we have to be deliberate and intentional on conveying the fact that, and regain and build trust with the parents, students, and teachers. So that's what I had to say. I'm sorry, but I'm very, very happy to hear about this.
All right, I want to shift gears and go to Mr. Cody. So now that we're in this COVID-19 era, I'm sure business has changed for you as iAcademy. But tell me, how do we preserve the integrity of online learning? And do you envision a world where all students are online, or what does the future hold in your opinion?
Yeah, look, I think online learning in general is really a niche market still, in terms of just, you know, people choosing that as a mode for learning, teaching and learning. I think it's a lifestyle choice that parents and teachers make, frankly, and students also make it, because once they have a taste of it and they kind of get into the flow of it, they tend to appreciate and like the lifestyle that's around online learning, because of the flexibility and whatnot. I don't think it's a one or the other. I think there will always be brick and mortar schools. There will always be the need for that. I just think the structure within those schools will change over time. You know, the use of those facilities, how they're used, how often they're used, how they're molded and shaped. I don't know that we'll continue to see, just four-wall classrooms. I think you could start to see some more open models and some more what I would look at as like learning cafes and learning center type setups where kids have a little more flexibility in age grouping, in ability grouping, and then teachers are more of a kind of a free-flowing resource as well. So lots of changes. Look, online learning is it's been around a long time. I've been working in the industry now for hate to admit, but for 16 years, 8 years here in Dubai, and it's something, as we've mentioned, it's not going to go away. It's not like you're going to turn the internet off. So these things are going to continue to expand and grow. And I think the leaders that can embrace it rather than try to fight against it. I think that's another key piece. And then I think the real strength will come in schools and school groups that actually embrace it as maybe the backbone of how they put their curriculum and their the resources together. I think that's important as well.
How do we transition into university and colleges now? I mean, in Australia, there's a school that about 10 years ago found a loophole in the law, and the principal was able to say, "I'm taking this curriculum and I'm throwing it out the door," and he was able to construct literally an individual learning plan for each and every student that suited the student at that time. So it wasn't about classrooms, it wasn't about grades, it was about their learning journey at that point in time. And it continues today. But what he also did is that he was able to link in with a number of universities in Melbourne, and he was able to develop his pathways so that if those children chose, they had a direct pathway into the university. And this is a fantastic initiative. And how can we leverage onto such a thing? It's so important that we move away from the total concept that the only way that a child can get into university is by attaining a certain score in a certain exam at a particular point in time. So I just hope that these barriers, which to some degree still need to be there, of course, but maybe to some degree we can start to chip away at these barriers and open up learning a little bit more.
Yeah, Max, just to jump in on that point, I think you're going to start to also see the nature of, sort of this finishing of high school and having it move on to, having it move to the traditional university. I think you're going to start to see that change as well, because I think now what's happening is, you're starting to see industry basically just kind of going after some of these top-notch kids and saying, look, skip that stuff. We'll kind of take you on. We'll train you. We'll give you basically on-the-job training and really the kinds of skills that you'll need to work, in our environment and maybe in a broader environment later.
And that's true, Cody. That's true, Cody, in the sense that schools will move away from that direct what you learn. And so I think the focus will be not on what you learn, but how you learn. And the better able that schools are able to teach kids to be critical thinkers, to be lifelong learners, the better that we're able to teach them how to problem solve and collaborate, then you will see that diminish in the need to give that direct instruction in an educational environment, because again, they will learn it on the job. They just need to know how to think, not what to think.
That's right. I agree.
Okay, I wanted to get into some of the questions from our guests. And I want to ask this question to Principal Goller. All right. They asked what type of support are schools providing regarding counseling for students in this unusual time and preparing them for higher education opportunities. So that's two parts: the social emotional counseling and also preparation for higher education.
Well, one of the things that we're doing, luckily we've hired a new assessment coordinator that's making sure that our students have their NAPO registrations done, their IELTS registrations done. We're still recruiting kids to be ready for the SAT when it does open up this summer. So, we have a person in place. That's matter of fact, we've had to kind of drum up a team to make sure all of our 12th graders had all of their documents ready just to be submitted, they can be ready to apply to university. So it's kind of a team approach in terms of making sure that their college and career readiness is on point and they're ready to matriculate to the next section in their lives. The counseling part, that's an important one, because I have some friends who actually have children that were, having some emotional issues from being home all the time, and not having, some expats here are only children. And when you don't have brothers and sisters and siblings to deal with this quarantine on, it becomes it becomes a struggle for a lot of students. So we have put counseling in place to reach out to students, tracking some of our students that we know are expats and are only children. Just having a method in place where we're keeping our supervisors, our social workers are also keeping contact with our parents and students to monitor their emotional well-being. So I think you have to have a team in place, and you have to strategically look for those students who, again, maybe single siblings or just have different needs. So it's a team approach, and we use our supervisors and our teachers, and again, different counseling type positions we have on campus to reach out and make sure students are emotionally having emotional proper well-being and also college and career ready.
Excellent. I wanted to ask that same question to Emma, and as it pertains to students of determination.
So, I mean, from our perspective, we've always operated a kind of a child-centered approach where we're kind of multidisciplinary practitioners within the school. We have a learning support department, and then we have a counselling team, which I think for you guys in kind of some of the US systems, typically it's your counsellors that might be the support mechanisms for students. So I just wanted to kind of offer that as clarification for the context. We work really carefully and there's a very joined up approach in terms of conversation. So there are lots of opportunities wherein any one member of staff can flag concerns about a child, whether that's safeguarding or whether that's a vulnerability through their social, emotional, mental health in these circumstances. We're looking at work submissions. We're looking at how they're engaging during live learning sessions, or are they engaging? Are they not turning up? And if we're seeing students who are beginning to withdraw from the experience, and there are few and far between, but there are very robust systems in place. So where it's appropriate, we're reaching out to parents. Where it's appropriate age and stage, we're reaching out directly to the students. We're looking at systems that we can put into place, both through one-on-one counselling sessions, but also moreover group sessions that might feel a little bit more art therapy. So you're kind of pulling away from the stresses and pressures of an academic curriculum to offer that diversity. And then from my perspective, in terms of transition, I'm not necessarily thinking as a practitioner into higher education, but even just in that step up to secondary school or into the high school. We got year 6 students, so our kind of 11-year-olds who've been robbed of that opportunity to be together at the end of primary, and that has impact for them, lasting impact potentially. So what can we do that would have been typical part of their school experience? So things like, a virtual talent show, end of year kind of performances and such, those moments of recognition, but also we're looking at those kind of transitions. So we're creating video banks of staff bios, so kind of a quick 30 seconds of each one of the teachers, so that students, and maybe your schools are the same, but we're unfortunately going to be impacted by some of the transient nature of poor families that aren't going to be in Dubai when we return in the new year. So we're going to have lots of new families. We need them to feel kind of that they get a sense of what the school is about and who we are. So there's lots of different mechanisms, and I know it will look different for all of us. We'll all be kind of innovative and creative in our approach, but I think it's really about planning forward. And I want to kind of echo something Heath was saying in regards to our colleagues and how hard they're working, but second that with actually the surrogate parent teachers and how hard they've worked, given that they've never done anything like this before, and they've coped with the challenges of their personal circumstances, with losses of jobs, with multiple siblings working off single devices, with so many different factors, and yet they've maintained again that resilience and that buoyance and that positivity, and they've reached out to each other. And I suppose kind of going back, just to wrap up from what I was saying earlier, I think they are an invaluable resource we have to tap into. We've shone a magnifying glass on some students during this time who may have been faced with challenges, and parents may not have understood the degree of challenge, but now they do. Maybe they found strategies that we hadn't found that we can bring back into school. So I think now more than ever, that kind of engagement and parent partnerships is absolutely, I'm not saying it's untapped, because we all work really hard to have those, but I think there's a different richness to that experience that we can borrow from as we go forward and as we return into school or otherwise.
Absolutely, absolutely. The parent partnership is paramount. We have another question, and I just want to let anyone answer this. They said, what strategies can be used to increase engagement for early years through distance learning? So that's KG1, KG2, even up to our grade 1. So what can we do to increase engagement and to sustain the continuity of learning? Let's go. Tammy, you look like you're ready.
I'm thinking about Maleha right now, so she's probably laughing. I think a lot of it is giving the students the intended outcome of the lesson and allowing them to come up with the strategy to prove their mastery. So I know for our KG1 and KG2, it looked a lot different. We continued with the literacy courses and things of that nature, but then we would do challenges. So for example, chronological ordering, and they had to come up with a video about an activity of that. And so we saw everything from making a sandwich to, lining up your dollies to reading a book, etc. So I think student choice here is important to allow them to keep them engaged. And screen time is difficult. That was a big conversation that we had at our school. How much screen time do kids already have? How much time do you do learning with them, led by the teachers versus videos and things like that? And how much do they need to play? They need that time away from the screen. Developmentally, they need to, process in their brains, the different kinesthetic movements, etc. So those are some strategies that we use that were really successful, and they were keen on it. But as adults, we worry about screen time. I'm sure all of you, after 1 week of distance learning, were squinting and seeing colors in your eyes and things because of the adjustment. So we think of what does that look like for the little ones as well.
I think if I can just add to that, I echo everything that Tammy said, but I think that was one of the things that I sort of alluded to when I spoke earlier about the opportunity to diversify the curriculum and really think about life skills. And when children of that age are in their home, then it's a perfect chance to, and Tammy's given some examples about making sandwiches and those kind of skills that, typically we may not be able to practice within school. I don't know if you guys have seen, but there's some fantastic videos of a little fella who can't be more than about 18 months, 2 years old, and he's cooking at home with his mum. I'm not saying that's happening as a result of distance learning, but he's literally, this 18-month-old, there with a sharp knife over a pan on the stove, popping everything in there. Talk about risk-taking, but what an excellent experience. He's tasting the food, he's handling equipment that we'd have to be doing risk assessments for all over the place. Those are the type of things that we can facilitate and promote in a home learning environment for those younger learners, and then the academics will follow. Of course, it misses the socialisation opportunities, and that for me, I think, is quite an area of concern, but I think that's one of the strategies or suggestions that we've kind of tried to promote.
Absolutely. We've actually reached our time. Mr. Max, a few closing words, and I want to thank everyone for attending. We've learned so much. We've covered so much ground, and this is the beginning of co-creating a narrative of education as it moves to the future. The narrative is happening. People are talking about it. So we can collaborate and be part of creating this narrative, or we could work in isolation in our own schools and silos. I prefer we work together and co-create the narrative and what education holds and for the future. Mr. Max.
Mr. Suleiman, again, what a beautiful segue. We talk about colleague schools. We are all colleagues and friends, and to all of the people out there that have come into this seminar, thank you so much for your time. And I particularly thank our panelists. Haven't they been extraordinary? In a normal situation, a room full of 60 or plus people, there'd be rousing applause right now for your work, for your wisdom, and for your encouragement. So thank you to our panelists. But let me have just a final word and thank our Mr. Suleiman for your wonderful chair today, directive questions, and for all of the work that you've done in bringing this seminar together. So thank you, Mr. Suleiman. And thank you all. God bless. And let's keep that conversation going. Let's not live in isolation. We all know each other now. Let's keep the contact. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Please complete the survey that's listed in the chat box. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.